So in this video, I'm going to be answering the question that I get a lot after having a long-term usage of the P1S and the A1. Which one is the better thing to buy if you are a tabletop gamer and wanting to print some terrain and stuff like that, or print things like fidgets and little kind of trinkets to have around the house for your kids, or just some random little props? So the short answer, for those of you who don't want to watch me waffle on for like 20 minutes, is the A1 is the much better value proposition. It is cheaper, it's far better value, and it basically does everything that the Bambu Lab P1S can do, just at a much more affordable price. However, there are of course caveats and areas where the P1S does do better and would be the more recommended machine, but we'll get onto that in the longer version of this. So thanks for watching to all of you people with short attention span, and for the rest of you, grab a coffee and let's head on over and talk about the longer reasons. So I have notes because that might keep me on track. And what did I just knock over behind me? That was probably a bad entrance. Now for this video, I am going to be focusing, like I said at the start, on terrain, just bits for tabletop gaming like game aids, things like props like that helmet I've got behind me, stuff like that that you might be printing. I'm not going to be talking about the really advanced engineering materials and bits like that because I don't do it, so therefore I don't have the knowledge to. But if you are looking for that more advanced material, then you're probably going to be doing different types of research, and the P1S will probably be the better machine for you. Now let's first off kick off with the aesthetics of these machines because they do look very, very different. Now the two major differences between these is that the Bambu Lab A1, which is the cheaper version, is a traditional bed slinger type printer. It looks like a 3D printer. People will see it and go, that's a 3D printer. Whereas the P1S, and I suppose by the P1P by extension as well, looks a little bit more classy, shall we say. It's all glass, it's sleek, it's got this lovely enclosure. It's got a little bit more spouse appeal where you could probably have it inside the house without getting divorced or kicked out. So bear that in mind if that is something that's important to you. The P1S and the P1P by extension is a Core XY machine, so therefore it's all enclosed and it just works a little bit differently. So aesthetically, I do give it to the P1S. It's a nicer looking machine. The other thing to consider as well is if you were going to be going for the AMS or the AMS Light, which is their multi-material bit, which allows you to change up the different colors and the materials as you are printing, the footprint on the P1S is just that little bit smaller. It's basically a big block square that sits down and the AMS goes on top of it. With the A1, you do have to have the AMS Light next to it, unless you're a madman or a mad lady, and you print the extension to go on top of the machine, which just always leaves me a little bit uneasy. Moving on ever so slightly when it comes to aesthetics, the A1 and the A1 Mini have a much better intuitive color touchscreen than the P1P and the P1S. I don't know why, it's so frustrating. I suppose it's all to do with differentiating it between the P1S and the X1 series. But the P1S has this terrible little Kindle touchscreen, whereas the A1 has a really nice colour touchscreen. If you're mostly interacting with the printer, this is a big deal, and it makes it so much nicer just to use the A1 without having to get your phone out and use the application, or go to your laptop or your computer and use the application on that. It's infuriating that the P1S has such a terrible screen. It's usable. You can find your way around it and do the things you need to, but if you want to print a file, for example, you've already printed, on the A1, it's so much easier because it gives you a preview of what that file is. On the P1P and the P1S, not so much. So when it comes to usability and just that general interface without having to use a phone or a computer, it definitely goes to the A1. Now moving across onto the print quality, and that's probably the thing that you are most interested about at the end of the day. And I can say, without a shadow of a doubt now, after using these machines for well over a year and getting hundreds, if not thousands of hours of usage on all of these machines, the print quality is basically identical. I cannot differentiate between anything that's been printed on my Bambu Lab A1 machine or my Bambu Lab P1S. They look fantastic right across the board, and you cannot go wrong when it comes to quality with either of these machines. The one thing to note, however, is if you are printing things that are tall and slim, the higher it gets on the A1, the more wobbly it will get. And that's just down to physics and the way these machines are built. A bed slinger is just moving around a lot more. There's a lot more wobble and stuff like that. So the taller that print gets, the more likely you are to lose some print quality. For things like terrain, I honestly don't think it's too much of an issue. I haven't really seen it. The only time I have seen the difference is at the top of terrain, and especially when it comes to things like Warhammer 40k, because they love their spikes and all the gothic stuff, is you get some like longer spikes. If they're at the top of a building or a roof or something like that, you can start to see some wobble. But if it's on the P1S, you get far less of that. So tall prints, anything that's long and slim, the P1S is going to be slightly better, but it's certainly not a deal breaker on the A1. The other thing to note when it comes to print quality is print speed. And I would say that on average, the A1 is approximately 10 to 15% slower than the P1S, but both are still really fast machines. And if you're coming from an older 3D printer, both of these are going to be night and day when it comes to speed. You just can't go wrong. They're fantastic. At this point, when I'm talking about printing as well, it would be wrong of me not to talk about the difference between materials. As I said, I don't use that much when it comes to anything outside of PLA, so I'm certainly not an expert on these. However, it is recommended that you only use PLA, PETG, TPU, and PVA filaments in the A1, whereas the P1S has compatibility for far more different types of filament that you might want to use, some more advanced mechanical properties and stuff like that. However, if you're in the market for those, you're probably not watching this video. Moving across onto maintenance, and both of them are really easy to maintain, at least in my experience. I've had the P1Ss now longer than I've had the A1, and I have had to do some bits of maintenance. I've had to basically strip apart the melty tool head bit, and I am not going to use the technical terms here, clearly. So I've had to pull apart like the hot end, remove all the gears and stuff like that, and it is easy enough to do. I've also had to do some basic maintenance on my A1 as well. I've not had any major issues. I've had to also take apart the main AMS, but we'll come back onto that later on. The front panel on the hot end for the P1S is nicer. It's this magnetic bit that you pull off, you unplug a couple of cables, and then you have access to anything. On the A1 instead, it's got this weird plasticky squeezy bit. So you kind of like squeeze it and it pops off, and then you get access to like the hot end and the nozzle. I said ages ago, in fact, that I thought that would eventually snap and break over time. It hasn't, but I don't remove it that often. I do think it's far better designed on things like the P1S. However, when it comes to nozzle changes, the A1 absolutely takes the win on this, because there's literally a clip, you pull off the nozzle, you pop the new one in, clip it back in place, and you are good to go. It is a really fast switchover speed. P1S, however, does take a little bit longer. There's 2 screws you need to remove, you pop those out, pop your nozzle off, pop the new one in, pop the 2 screws back in, you're pretty much off to the races. So it's not that much longer, but I am looking forward to whatever they upgrade on the P1S in the future, the P12 or whatever they call it, having hopefully that hot nozzle swappable, someone come up with a better name for it than I am. Okay, moving across onto some quality of life issues. And the first one is the sound of this. So if you're going to be having these in your house, you probably want to know, how loud are they? Now, when it comes to the P1S, this is definitely a louder machine. At least in my experience, I know everyone's going to have different opinions on this, but in my opinion, the P1S is the far louder machine. Have you ever taken somebody captive and locked them in a cage? The answer is probably no, but if you have, you know what that sounds like. And that's what the P1S sounds like. It sounds like someone banging on a cage in a box all the time, because it is rattling and it is shaking, and it is basically, it's becoming a sentient being trying to escape. It's a loud machine. It really, really is. Once it gets going and the speed kicks in, it gets very loud. The A1, however, is just, I don't know, it's a little bit more of a calm type of captive. It makes noise, but not much. However, where the A1 does make more noise, and it might be a more annoying noise, is the fan. Once the fan kicks in to cool down that nozzle or cool down whatever it's doing at the time, it can get quite whiny and annoying, but it is rare. So the A1 is definitely the quieter machine. To put it into perspective, when I've been doing meetings at work, when I had the P1S in the room with me, people could hear it. Like in meetings, I would have to make sure that wasn't printing, because people would know that I was printing because it was loud. When I have the A1 going, no one's ever been able to hear it. It just gets cleared out. So, take that with a pinch of salt. That's just my experience of it. But the P1S, in my opinion, is the far louder machine. Another thing to consider is the P1S has the better camera on it. And this isn't necessarily down to the camera quality, but just down to the camera positioning. On the A1, it's positioned and you just can't see the start of your print because of the way it's positioned. It's almost below the print bed, so as it goes up, it takes a while before you can actually see what it's been printing and whether or not that print has been successful. The P1S, you can pretty much see it right from the start. So in my opinion, the P1S takes the win. Also, the P1 has the better lighting inside of it as well, so you can see your prints far better. Again, the A1, I keep pointing over there because that's where my printers are, but the A1 has the light pretty much next to the camera, so that's also facing down. So you can basically just see the side of the printer illuminated, and you can't see anything on the print bed until it goes up. So You know, if you are somebody who's going to be monitoring your prints remotely, wanting to get some recordings and stuff like that, then the P1P and the P1S is the better machine for that. Next one up is the A1 flings its poop. So as it's purging material, it flings it out to the side. So you will need to print off something to catch that. I have this, which sits next to my machine, and basically as it flings its poop, hits that, lands in here. It's not too much of an issue if you're printing in just one color. However, if you are doing multi-material printing, and every time it changes its color, it flings its poop, so you will want something to catch it. The P1P and the P1S is a little bit more dignified in that it poops down the back of the machine and it drops down a poop chute. So again, you probably want to have something that catches that poop, but it just feels like it's less random where that poop ends up. So just something to consider. And the final thing to talk about when it comes to the quality of life with this machine is that the P1S is an enclosed machine. That will make a difference to some users. So I currently am printing in my garage. Now what that means is my P1S can print all the time. I'm in the UK, it gets cold, and through winter I had no issues. Even when we went down to like -7, there was no issues at all printing on P1S. It just did it and everything stuck very, very nicely. No issues at all. However, the A1 is a different story. Because it's not enclosed, your print, as it is printing, is more susceptible to things like cold drafts, cold air. You can get layer adhesion issues, and it can pull off the print bed. So that is something to bear in mind. If you're printing in a cold environment, you may have more issues with something like the A1, and the P1S would be the better machine for you. However, one thing I've been doing is I've been using this Big Tree Tech, the cryo grip plate that they sent over to me. That has solved all of my issues when printing in the cold with the A1. However, it won't necessarily fix all of your issues because you might still get some layer adhesion issues partway through the print, so everything will stick on the print bed, but it won't necessarily stick together as it gets, you know, too cold. So just something to bear in mind. Also, one thing to note is I did quite a bit of research into putting my A1 into an enclosure or some kind of box or something to help, you know, that issue there. But it is widely recommended that you don't enclose your A1 because it doesn't have cooling. So you could then have a machine that then overheats and breaks. So don't do that. And if you do, make sure you do your research into it. Moving across onto the AMS, and that is their multi-material printing. So if you're wanting to do multi-colors, print with different materials and stuff like that, and have those switch partway through the print, then you will either be going for the AMS, which goes with the P1S, or you'll be going with the AMS Light. Now at this point, I do want to note that Bambu Lab have announced their new AMS2 unit. I don't have one of those to test out, but this helps me just to kind of update a few things that do exist now as part of that. Now, my preference is absolutely the AMS Light. I think it is a far superior AMS system versus the AMS. Oh, I almost missed the chair. This is the standard AMS, and basically you load up your rolls of filament in here, and as it's changing, it takes each one of those and pushes them back out and stuff like that. It's a good solution. However, I've just never had any success at all with this machine. What I tend to find is it overloads, it just can't take the filament in a lot of the time. I just get a lot of failures with it. It's just been a pain in the bottom. I've completely stripped this down recently, so I've pulled it all apart, taken all the bits out of there, made sure all the magnets are aligned, cleaned out all the gunk and stuff like that. It seems to be working better, so I guess that's one bonus. The AMS Light is just easier to use in my opinion. You just load your spools onto the side, it takes them in, and I have never had any issues at all when it comes to the AMS Light. It just works nicely, and it's far cheaper. Now, a couple of things to note. This, obviously, is a little bit more enclosed. The original one is not heated, so it's not going to dry out your filament, but it is a bit more enclosed, and you load up all like your desiccant or whatever it's called, and that helps to keep moisture away from your filaments. On the AMS Light, that is not the case, so just something to bear in mind. You're also not meant to use cardboard spools with the original AMS. And they do work, and the first time I mentioned that, everyone's like, but you can do it. It's like, yes, you can absolutely do it. I do it. And that is probably why my machine stopped working. When I took it apart and stripped it down, all the gears inside of this front part and all the gears inside of the bottom part as well were completely just packed full of tiny bits of cardboard fiber. That's the reason they suggest that you don't do it. You can get like these ring bits that go around and all these adapters and stuff like that that should help to alleviate those issues. But just bear in mind that if you do get this machine, you're going to be a little bit more limited in terms of what you can use. However, if you are going for the standard AMS with the P1S, you should probably go for the new AMS because it is far more feature rich. and it definitely looks like it solves a lot of the issues that this has. The other limitation, at least at time of recording, is with the standard P1S and the AMS, you can use multiple of these. So you can have like 8, 12, 16 different colors all printing. And that is a big win if you are really, really into multi-material printing. With the AMS Light, you can only have one of those. You can only use one AMS unit with your A1. That is changing. Apparently in Q3, you will be able to use the new AMS 2 combined with an AMS Light. So you'll be able to have at least 2 AMS units running at the same time on the A1. It's not delivered yet though, so you know what, don't buy based on the promised features. Never do that because it might not happen. So that's the AMS, and I guess this brings us to the end of the video now of which one should you buy. And that's always going to be a decision for you to make. Hopefully going through all of those bits there, you've got a better idea of what sort of use cases might be better for you. Like I said, just an overall answer, the A1 is the far better value proposition. It's about £400 at time of recording for the A1 combo, which is the A1 and the AMS Light, which is an amazing value proposition. That's one of the best value propositions, at least in my experience and opinion, in 3D printing at the moment. You cannot go wrong with that. The P1S with the new AMS2 is about £830, so pretty much double the price of that. Are those extras and those little bits extra there worth it for you? Only you can answer that. But if I was in the position where I wanted to have maybe multiple of these machines or something like that, I would probably go for multiple A1 units, just because for me, for printing tabletop terrain, fidgets for my kids, all these random little toys and props and stuff like that, the A1 does a spectacular job and is a far better value proposition for somebody like me. But your use case may be different. So let me know in the comments, which one do you have? Which one would you recommend for somebody who's just into tabletop gaming and all of that stuff? And yeah, if you are watching this video and you're thinking about buying one of these, which one will you buy? Let me know. Has this helped you solve your dilemma? Because I get asked this a lot. Even though I've done this video in the past, this is based on a far longer term usage. So, you know, bear that in mind. Thank you so much for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button because it really helps the channel to grow. And hopefully I will see you in the next one. I also do have a Discord as well, so if you want to head on over to that to ask any more questions, by all means do that. And in the meantime, stay safe and happy printing. Ta-ra!